It was a bright Saturday afternoon, and the Westbrook Mall was packed. The sounds of busy chatter, the hum of the food court, and the distant clink of cash registers filled the air. For most people, it was just another ordinary day of shopping and spending time with friends. But for Shelby, Rosalind, and Michelle, it was another day to showcase their confidence and make sure the world knew they were in charge. Shelby was the one who always seemed to take charge. She had this magnetic aura about her, an undeniable presence that made heads turn when she walked into a room, or in this case, the mall. It wasn't just her impeccable fashion sense or the way she styled her hair. It was the way she carried herself, with a quiet arrogance, as if the world revolved around her. Rosalind and Michelle had been her friends for years, but even they knew that they were more like her sidekicks than equal partners. They didn't mind it after all. Being with Shelby meant being in the spotlight, and for them, that was enough. As they wandered through the mall, Shelby was in her usual element. She bumped into people with no regard for their personal space, made cutting remarks to store employees, and reveled in the attention she received from the people around her. "Move it," she snapped to an elderly woman who was taking too long to get through a door. Rosalind and Michelle just chuckled, unsure whether they were laughing at the woman or with Shelby. They didn't care. Shelby was in control, and that's all that mattered to them. But today, something was different. They were approaching the food court when Shelby's attention was caught by a woman walking slowly ahead of them, her toddler in tow. Shelby, however, wasn't concerned with the woman's struggles. All she saw was someone slowing her down. "Ugh, why does everyone walk so slow?" Shelby muttered loudly, her voice dripping with disdain. Her friends laughed, but those nearby shot quick, uncomfortable glances. Shelby was used to this. She knew how to command attention if it was negative. She barged past the woman and her child, her elbow hitting the toddler's stroller. The mother flinched, but quickly adjusted, trying to brush off the encounter. However, Shelby wasn't done. She spun around to look at the woman, her lips curling into a sneer. "Seriously, you'd think people would move faster," she added, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. "Who has time to dawdle in the middle of a busy mall?" Rosalind and Michelle laughed nervously behind her, but the other shoppers weren't laughing. A few whispered among themselves, clearly uncomfortable with the rudeness. The woman, flustered but composed, said nothing. She just nodded and moved aside, grateful to not escalate the situation. That was the thing she loved most, being in control. And she was about to assert her dominance even more. As they passed a small food kiosk near the exit, Shelby noticed a man standing alone, quietly waiting for his order. He was dressed in a simple brown hoodie and dark sunglasses, his posture relaxed, as if he had no interest in the noise around him. He seemed completely oblivious to the chaos Shelby was stirring up, and that irritated her even more. Without thinking, Shelby strutted toward him, not bothering to give him any space as she brushed past. Her shoulder hit his, hard. "Watch where you're going," she snapped, her tone harsh and dismissive. The man didn't flinch, nor did he react at all. He simply turned his head slowly, his expression calm and unreadable. For a moment, Shelby froze. There was something about his gaze that told her this wasn't just some bystander she could push around. His name was Craig Granger, and he wasn't like anyone Shelby had encountered before. His calm demeanor and piercing eyes were enough to make her hesitate, but Shelby wasn't one to back down. She was always the one who made others uncomfortable, not the other way around. "Are you seriously just going to stare at me?" Shelby asked, her voice rising slightly. "Do you have a problem or something?" Craig didn't answer right away. He just stood there, his jaw tightening slightly, but otherwise maintaining his stillness. It was almost as if he was letting her words bounce off him, unfazed. This only made Shelby more agitated. She wasn't used to being ignored, let alone ignored by someone who looked like they were too cool to care. "Hey!" Shelby took a step closer to him, invading his personal space. "What's your deal? You can't even say anything?" She was practically yelling now, and people around them had started to notice. Rosalind and Michelle were standing behind her, looking at each other nervously, unsure if they should intervene. But Shelby was on a roll. She was determined to get a reaction out of him. She wasn't going to let this man stand there, silent and unbothered, as if she were nothing more than a minor inconvenience. And then, in a move that no one saw coming, Shelby raised her hand and slapped Craig across the face. It wasn't a hard slap, but it was enough to make everyone in the vicinity gasp. The air seemed to freeze for a moment, as the crowd collectively held their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. But Craig didn't move. He didn't flinch or react in any way. He simply stood there, his expression still calm, but something in his eyes had shifted. It was as if he was no longer willing to let her get away with this behavior. Shelby, thinking she had won, crossed her arms and smirked. "What, you gonna cry about it now?" she taunted, her voice dripping with sarcasm. She expected him to lash out, to shout, or at least say something, anything. But he didn't. Instead, Craig calmly took off his sunglasses, revealing a pair of cold, steely eyes. His gaze locked onto Shelby's, and for the first time, she felt a twinge of unease. It was like she was looking into the eyes of someone who wasn't intimidated by her at all. Without saying another word, Craig stepped forward just one step, but it was enough to close the distance between them. It was clear now, he wasn't afraid of her. And for the first time, Shelby wasn't sure how to react. "You should be careful who you mess with," Craig said, his voice low and steady, like the calm before a storm. "Not everyone is going to just let you walk all over them." Shelby opened her mouth to say something, but before she could get the words out, Craig turned and began to walk away. He didn't make a scene, didn't raise his voice, but there was something about his presence that left Shelby speechless. As he walked away, Shelby stood there, frozen. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't the one in control. It wasn't just his physical presence that had thrown her off, it was the way he had reacted to her. He hadn't gotten angry, hadn't tried to escalate things. He had simply remained calm, and in doing so, he had shown her something she hadn't seen before: power and restraint. Rosalind and Michelle were silent, both unsure of what to say. They had never seen Shelby this way, unsettled, unsure of herself. Shelby, still processing what had just happened, turned slowly and walked back toward her friends. For the first time in her life, she felt embarrassed. She had been the one who bullied others, who made people feel small. But here was someone who had just ignored her, not out of weakness, but because he didn't have to engage with her. It was a lesson she hadn't expected to learn today, and one that would stay with her for a long time. As they left the mall, Shelby was unusually quiet. She didn't boast about how she had won the encounter, nor did she complain about what had happened. She was simply lost in thought, trying to make sense of everything. Craig hadn't fought her or argued. He had just been calm, and somehow, that had been enough to make her realize she wasn't always the one in control. And that's when she understood true power wasn't about how loud you could be, or how much you could dominate others. It was about knowing when to speak and when to stay silent, when to act, and when to let things go. It was a lesson Shelby wasn't likely to forget anytime soon. Thank you for watching until the end. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that could change the way you see the world. Turn on the notification bell to never miss an important story.